Today, we talk steady, underrated, and cheaper players that we think are going to be great assets to help you win your Dynasty leagues. We talk about how we identify them and trades involving these players in real leagues. Welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Just like with our hot takes video earlier this week, it's just JP and I. We're all rotating, getting a week off. We are excited to be bringing you these value players next week. We are going to be hopping into our coverage of what's going on in training camp. So please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Easiest way to help out the channel, means more than you'll ever know. Let's hop in first into what are we actually looking for when we're identifying undervalued players, JP? Start us off with just, the bare basics.
I'm looking for guys that I think are priced around their floor, so that these guys, they have a lot of room to grow from that ADP. These are guys that have been pretty productive lately, being pushed down draft boards due to the perception, that they lack upside. And these are guys that probably have some name fatigue. These are guys that you're not really pumping your fist when you take these guys. What about you? Did I miss anything important?
I definitely pump my fist sometimes when I take these guys. I think that it's the foundation of the food pyramid, right? No one's that excited about grains or whatever's on the bottom, but they're important, right? You need some of these guys. Obviously, in a perfect world, we'd have 9 superstar hammers, but I think there's a lot of movement along some people that wide receivers in a certain range, for example, don't matter. But I do think that there's a lot more of a difference between having 3 wide receiver 20 to 30 range players than 3 wide receiver 40 to 50 range players, even if the difference between the guys from one of those guys to another guy isn't big. When you can multiply that difference by 3 players, for example, I think these are the types of guys that are very overlooked in valuation. I think age is a huge thing. We are so very ageist in Dynasty. I'm a little bit responsible for this. I do some of it myself all the time. I'm working on it, though. David and I talk about this all the time. He's trying to talk me down off of it. It's okay. You can have a young core and then old other pieces. And I was like, I'm not sure. But it's definitely something that I think scares a lot of people off of these types of guys. For our kind of definition that we're going off of here, we are really only looking at guys that are worth under a first round pick in value. There are definitely some guys we'll shout out here at the end as well that we're not going to touch on. These guys are not the only ones. But we are looking for guys that we feel sure or pretty close to sure about. Because there's a lot of guys that you well, this guy has a path. We're not going for this guy has a path. We're going for this guy's situation is either sure or unchanged, or perhaps this guy's situation has improved and the talent is so there. I was having a discussion with one of our good friends of the show, Austin, earlier today. And yeah, talking about this and going through, we went through probably about 40 names together, maybe 30 names together. And there's so many players that you feel like are a good value, but the floor or the guarantee is not there. So we're really trying to hammer in guys that we feel are a guarantee, or as close to a guarantee as you can have in this crazy game full of variance. JP, who is your first 100% locked and loaded guarantee?
100% locked and loaded guarantee would be Christian Kirk, right? This is a guy. I don't know how many people are pumping their fists when they grab this guy in redraft, but he is going to help your team. In 2022, going back to the season before last, he was wide receiver 11. He was a top 12 wide receiver. Now, this last year, he had a dud of a week in week 1, right? But if you take that out from weeks 2 through 12, Kirk, he was still the wide receiver 17, right? That's a really helpful wide receiver. If that guy's in your flex, that is a big advantage over your competition, especially in full point PPR, which is what I'm using here. He's great in this format. Now, of course, he got injured in week 13 as the first play of the game. He caught a pass, and unfortunately, he was out for the rest of the year, so he could not help you for your fantasy playoffs. He's going to be back this year. Injuries happen. 2023, just looking at the Jags points scored, they were 14th in the NFL. I think Trevor Lawrence is a great quarterback. I think that they can go a little bit higher, and this is kind of evidenced by in 2022, they were 10th. I think that they could be just inside that top 10, maybe 10th. I just think that Trevor Lawrence is a great player, and Doug Peterson, he handed the reins to Press Taylor last year. I don't think he did as good of a job. They didn't use Calvin Ridley very creatively at all. Now they bring in Brian Thomas, and I think that this helps Christian Kirk because we know Christian Kirk is not a guy who's burning deep very often, and Brian Thomas Jr., he's going to be doing that for this team. It's going to make the safeties kind of, be further back. They can't come down into the box to cover up the middle of the field where Christian Kirk is really eating teams alive. This guy, he's being drafted as wide receiver 30 on Underdog, and I think that's kind of close to his floor. I don't really see him finishing much lower, if at all, any lower than that. I think this guy's probably going to finish, in the wide receiver 20 range, and we just saw 2022 is wide receiver 11, which I think he can get pretty close to that mark again. He's still the same great player that, like I said, he's a slot player, maybe not a guy that can be top 5, but I think this guy can be consistently good. And on Keep Trade Cut at wide receiver 36 price tag, I'd be happy to pay up to get this guy if I need a flex.
I love that pick. In fact, in our Dino Construction startup draft that we just did for our first listener league, I got him at the 8-9 turn, at the 8-12 pick, right before Amari Cooper, right after Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, Stephon Diggs, all in the same range. And I think I prefer Kirk over all of those guys right there. I love that pick. I love the value there. I agree 100%. Like 30th, wide receiver 30, that's his floor in my opinion. If he's healthy, he's a wide receiver 2, and he's priced as a wide receiver 3, and he's not that old. I think he's 27 or 28. So when you look at all of that combined for a 27-year-old wide receiver, I just think it's a brilliant pick. We were fighting over that guy and one other guy, and that next guy is my first value pick, Diontae Johnson. These were the two no-brainers for both of us. And for Diontae Johnson, unlike Christian Kirk, he doesn't necessarily have the actual wide receiver 1 in his track record history. However, I do think he has it in his potential here. So, I mean, first of all, like just looking at what old man Adam Thielen did last year, where he was like a wide receiver 1 for the first several weeks before, he ran out of coffee or green tea or whatever it is old people drink for energy. And after that point, he really kind of fell off, was unable to do stuff and just stay consistent. But that's because he was not able to get open in the same way that Diontae Johnson can. This guy has a all green reception perception route tree. And since 2020, he is literally the number 1 wide receiver in ESPN Open Score, which is just a analytics tool available that ESPN does to show how a wide open wide receivers get. He was number 1. So above Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, et cetera, since 2020. When you put all of that into a quarterback that we saw last year was not afraid of locking on to a player and just feeding him over and over and over again, and you give him a guy who can get open that much better, and a guy who some of his inability to do things comes from a 2022 season where he didn't have a touchdown catch. He had 119 consecutive receptions, including the entire 2022 season without a touchdown. I was watching highlights from the 2023 season and his first touchdown catch from last year. They said, oh, that's his first touchdown catch since Big Ben was throwing the ball. And I just went like, Kenny Pickett sucks. Same reason why George Pickens was a wide receiver buy for me. Getting away from Kenny Pickett, even if it's going to Bryce Young, and that's not amazing, the upgrade there still from Kenny Pickett to this, like I am all in. And when he is priced wide receiver 47 on Keep Trade Cut, dear gosh, like he was projected to go in the 10th round of our startup. I traded up into the 9th round because I knew there's no way that David was letting him get back past me all the way to me. So I traded up to grab this guy 100%. I think he is a bargain. And I think he has wide receiver 1, like wide receiver 10, 11, 12 in the range of outcomes, the way that Christian Kirk did it a few years ago. And I'm all in on this guy. Like I think I have 4 or 5 shares. So I'm over 25% rostered on this guy. I'm over 30% rostered on this guy, I think now at this point. And I don't mind being overexposed to him because the price is low and the ceiling is, in my opinion, high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. The floor is wide receiver 24. How can you turn down a guy like this with where he's going? I don't understand it. What are people doing? To be honest with you, I'm baffled. The only reason I didn't take him sooner is because I didn't have to, but I should have to is how I feel. Tell me I'm right.
You're right. Jameson Williams is the guy priced right behind Diontae Johnson, and that just blows my mind. He's wide receiver 48 with Diontae at wide receiver 47. Like, what in the world? A.D. Mitchell, he's at wide receiver 45, 2 wide receiver spots ahead of Diontae. And yeah, believe me, I like A.D. Mitchell, and maybe I'd take him in a productive struggle over Diontae, but in a vacuum, which that's what Keep Trade Cut I think should be, or in my rankings, I'm going to rank Diontae Johnson ahead for sure. This guy, like you said, he's one of the best route runners out there. So yeah, his ceiling Yeah, it might be capped a little bit, but it's not that much if you can get 150, 160 targets. I think that this guy, he's got like the combination of a floor and a ceiling. And I love Christian Kirk, but for the price tag of Diontae Johnson, I think I'd slightly rather pay that price tag just based on the fact that wide receiver 36 versus wide receiver 47. That's a pretty sizable gap. I love this pick, and you called dibs on him first before I could. So that just goes to show how much we love this guy at his current price.
Never underestimate the power of dibs, boys and girls. It's one of the most magical things in the world. And JP, who is your next undervalued player?
So we got another wide receiver here, and that is going to be Chris Godwin. Right? Last year, he was top 20 in targets and receptions. Top 20. He also surpassed 1,000 receiving yards, but he had 2 receiving touchdowns. Just 2. That feels like the outlier here out of all those production metrics right there. Looking back at the past 2 seasons before last year, he was a top 20 wide receiver in 2021 and 2022. Yeah, and all the reports say that they are moving him back to the slot, and I think that's great for his production. That's where he was highly productive in those seasons prior to last year. And Mike Evans, just looking at his season last year, right, he was wide receiver 7 in PPR. He's now going with wide receiver 17 in underdog. So the community as a whole is expecting Mike Evans' production to drop off. And I think that's fair to assume. He's also going into his age 31 season, Mike Evans is. So that is right around the range where sometimes the age cliff does hit. That's kind of the range where it got guys like Julio Jones and Mike Evans. He's a big guy. So I don't know if he's going to be a guy that, can dodge that age cliff. Maybe he's still good this year. I think he probably is. But there's at least a chance that he, hits that, spot where he starts to slow down, and that would help Chris Godwin. He is wide receiver 47 on Keep Trade Cut right now. Like I said, he was a top 20 receiver the past 2 seasons prior. The only thing that went wrong for him this year was touchdowns. 2 receiving touchdowns on a top 20 target total in the NFL. That is not something that I expect to stick. We know that touchdowns, they are very variable from year to year. The variance is the highest on touchdowns of anything. So I think if he just gets to an average number of 6, 7, you're going to be happy that you took him as the wide receiver 42 in Keep Trade Cut. So I think he is another solid value that's being drafted pretty close to his floor.
Yeah, he's a player that I have a handful of shares on, and everywhere I have him, I am ecstatic to have him as a wide receiver 4 on a team. He's not a guy that I feel comfortable as a wide receiver 2 because I want my wide receiver 2s to be pushing wide receiver 1 upside, but he's easily a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside, and where you're saying he's priced, I love these old guys this year. What's happened to me? Who am I? I love them because they're cheap, though, of course, and we will get into price in a little bit. My last undervalued player is a running back that we were both kind of fighting over here, and that is David Montgomery. This one's pretty simple. I'm a Lions fan, and that's the only reason why. No, I'm just kidding. As a Lions fan, someone who watched a lot of these games, someone who's been watching a lot of games over the last few seasons, and can tell you we have a heck of an offensive line and a coach that loves to run the ball inside the red zone. David Montgomery has that job as the red zone back, as the goal line back. And because of that, I am all in on him at price. Last year, he was RB15 in points per game. 2 years ago, Jamal Williams in the same role, RB19. And Monty is much better. These are the guys who are going to be getting somewhere between 10 to 15 to possibly 17 touchdowns like Jamal Williams did a year ago or 2 years ago. He is the RB23 on Keep Trade Cut. And at that type of a price point, the way I play Dynasty is running backs. What can you do for me this year? And if you can do something for me next year, that's free. That's just bonus. That's gravy. Given the fact that I think he's priced at RB23 at a price that is the worst possible outcome, if he's RB20, I honestly would be surprised. I think he's going to be somewhere between RB15 and 18. Like, I think RB20, 21, 22, like if he's that low, I'll be, like I said, I think that's lower than he's likely to go out, but that's the worst case scenario is the RB23 price. Where he has, of course, now the handcuff upside that if Gibbs misses time, he is an RB1 during the time that Gibbs misses. Now, of course, that's true for Gibbs as well. If Monty misses time, he probably is, and he probably is an RB1 regardless, to be honest, but maybe he's RB1 overall without Monty. But one of them is cheap, and the other one costs you 2 firsts plus. So for that reason, I think Montgomery is just a heck of a value and someone I am interested in on any competing team where I can get him.
They're very committed to the running game over there, and their offensive line is incredible. They are great. They create some big lanes, and like you said, they have a strong propensity to run it inside the 5. And I think David Montgomery, maybe he loses out on some of those to Gibbs. Maybe they work him in more in that area, but I still think he's going to have a solid role there. And to your point, if Jahmyr Gibbs does go down with injury, which he is a smaller guy, so maybe the chances of him going down with injury are a little bit higher. David Montgomery, he also has a pass catching skill set too. He is a guy that could be a top 10 running back down the stretch if an injury were to occur to Gibbs. Hopefully not. We don't want to see that happen. But if he's your RB2 or 3 in that scenario, oh my gosh, that is such a strong boost to your starting lineup in the playoffs.
Like in my Megala Dynasty team, no, I don't want Gibbs to get injured. As a Lions fan, he's going to carry us to the Super Bowl. Come on. But JP, even though it's not on the show sheet, we did talk about it. Let's go ahead and a couple honorable mentions. I will start us out with Evan Ingram. If you want to know more about it, listen to the tight end buys episode, where I go very in depth on why I think he's a buy. He is definitely undervalued and priced way below his production ceiling. And JP, I think you have one from the same tight end buy episode as well.
Yeah, I think Jake Ferguson, also just looking at what he did last year, and he had pretty bad touchdown luck. And the receiving core there, Dallas, did not get any better at all. So it's tough to see Jake Ferguson do any worse than he did last year. And if the touchdowns are to hit with a little increase in volume this year, this guy could be a really strong value this year.
Yeah, definitely like both those picks. Give that episode a listen if you haven't, and we have some really good arguments as to why even more so. Now we're going to hop into our trade segment, starting off with one I just made in our Dino Construction Listener League startup. I gave my 25 second, third, and I moved back from the 1101 to the 1105, all for one Diontae Johnson. I was very happy to do this, even though it's maybe more than in a vacuum I'd want to pay, but I feel like that's a late second and a late third. I still have 2 firsts left to backfill holes. JP, what do you think about this?
I think assuming that the second and third is late, it is a solid move. We just talked about how much we love him. And yeah, I think it's a fair price to pay for sure. I don't really care about the 11th round slide back. It's barely anything. If you miss the playoffs, you'd probably be kicking yourself, but it's hard to see that happen. I think you're perfectly fine that this was a good move.
Moving into some more picks here. I'm going to start you off, JP, with Christian Kirk and a third or a 25 first.
I got to go with the first here. Although I love me some Christian Kirk, first round pick, it just has more value in the market. And if it's a random one, who knows if it's an earlier mid, then yeah, I'm gonna have that side, come rookie draft season next year.
Yeah, starting off with an easy one.
All right, Justin, start 11, Diontae Johnson and Xavier Worthy or Drake London.
Man, you are again pulling at my heartstrings. I'm going to be honest. So this is a start 11. In a start 9, I'm going Drake London. In a start 11, the price point on Drake London, to me, he's worth less than 2 firsts, but more than a first and probably more than a first and 2 seconds. Xavier Worthy is worth a first, more or less, but I might take the first for him, just depending. Diontae Johnson, I think I'd pay 2 seconds for him. Potentially. So the price point is just about there. I think Diontae Johnson is probably pretty likely to perform pretty equally to Drake London this year. I think Drake London has a higher chance of being a top 5 wide receiver than Diontae Johnson. I don't think Diontae Johnson has top 5 in the range of outcomes, although Adam Thielen did for a second. But then I get a Xavier Worthy as well, who has the possibility to possibly outperform Drake London on the long term. This one is practically a coin flip for me. I think in a start 11, if I need wide receiver, I'd go Diontae Johnson. If I have, in a start 11, I can start 6 wide receivers. In a start 11, if I have 8 wide receivers on my team or 9 wide receivers on my team that I think are kind of start worthy range, then I would take Drake London for the elite upside. I think in a vacuum, I'm going to go somehow Diontae Johnson, Xavier Worthy. Tell me I'm making a huge mistake, JP.
I'm going Drake London. I can understand with the breakdown. I think that's a great way to break it down with it being, price tag with a first or second, how they relate that way. That kind of started to make me think a little bit, but I am going to side with Drake London because I think you probably could get a little bit more for Drake London. Although I love me some Diontae Johnson, but I am a little bit lower on Worthy. If I can flip into a first, I would like to do it personally. But yeah, I'll take London.
Yeah, and I think London is more likely to give you access to somebody higher up. You could add a first to London if you had a spare first lying around and start trying to attack the range of Amon-Ra St. Brown or someone who's down on Justin Jefferson and at least start a conversation where the other assets on the other side, Diontae Johnson, Xavier Worthy, are never going to really start that conversation. Even though Diontae is great, undervalued player. Undervalued players aren't always the best trade chips. Sometimes they're better in our starting lineups.
All right, Justin, start 11. David Montgomery in a fourth or Diontae in a third.
With where these guys just went in our startup, where they're valued in keep, trade, cut, this is a super fair trade. And to be honest with you, again, I'm going to cop out here and say it depends on my team construction very much so. If I need running back, I might take the Monty side. If I need wide receiver and I already have a couple running backs, I'm easily taking the Diontae side. In a straight vacuum, I think I'm taking Diontae and a third, though, because of the third. If it was straight up Diontae or Monty, I don't think I'd make a choice. I think I would just tell you to go away. But getting the 3-4 swap, I think I lean that way, even though the keep trade cut value is probably on the Monty side.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I think I do slightly lean Diontae Johnson here just because the pick is higher on that side. And I personally see them pretty even, but I do really like both. But I'm taking Diontae there.
And JP, 2 random seconds next year or Chris Godwin? Start 9.
If it's a second and a third, I think that's my line where I do go Chris Godwin. But if it's 2 seconds, I kind of want that upside to have an early second. And then that gives me access to some pretty solid players at that point. All right, Justin, start 11. Najee Harris or David Montgomery. This is a good debate. I think that these guys are probably in the same tier of running back in a lot of people's rankings.
Yeah, so I couldn't find any cash price trades for Monty. They were all players involved, so I thought this was an interesting one. I do think I'm definitely going Monty over Najee, and it's not even close for me, simply because I know for a fact what Monty's role is, and I know that it's fantasy valuable. I don't know for a fact what Najee's role is going to be. I think maybe Najee has a little bit higher upside, but how much higher is that upside really in a what's going to be some sort of a timeshare versus a guy who's in what we know is going to be a fantastic offense? So it's pretty easily David Montgomery for me here.
Yeah, I see these guys very, very similarly, but I think that the Lions offense will be better and higher scoring. So that's what makes me lean David Montgomery.
All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, until next time.